Well, hey, welcome to the Branch Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. Pastors Chris and Anthony and myself sit down to talk about a topic that honestly, I don't know has an exact answer, one that we've wrestled with behind the scenes for a few weeks as we've been discussing it. And so I think it's a really good discussion, one that's going to be very practical for specifically marriages. And so I hope it's an encouragement to you. And always, if it is, share it with family and friends because we love getting the word out and just to encourage people in their faith. So again, thank you for joining us. All right, so the day that we're filming this, we are in the middle of a snow extravaganza. I mean, it's extravaganza. Snow has maybe 10 plus inches on us over the last week. It's that stupid cold where you have to ask yourself, why do we live here? This weekend is scheduled, I think, to drop like literal temperature to be negative 15, something like that, which is just crazy. So here's my question. Looking back in your life, do you have a positive memory that contains snow?
Like all snow days were like positive memories growing up. Like I don't remember bad. The only bad thing I remember, I realize this is not your question. The only bad thing I remember is I just got my driver's license and I had a V8 truck and it did not have 4-wheel drive. And my dad had told me not to drive and I left and I went somewhere that day and somehow my dad found out and that was the only negative snow experience that I can remember. But having
so you literally answered the opposite of my question.
So
negative experience.
to answer your question, it was always fun. I mean, we would always go out to my grandma's house. She had a lot of hills and we would like sled ride all the time. I remember building ramps over a ditch like that they had. We always had a good time. My grandma would always come out and sled ride with us. My dad, my mom, they'd always come out and sled ride with us. So it just always had a lot of positive memories and playing in the snow. And I've always loved winter. And so like, I just have a lot of good memories in snow days. And who doesn't like getting out of school?
For sure. Yeah. No, I have a lot of good ones too. The ones I remember most, I had a friend growing up. His name is Kyle. We would snowboard together. Like we basically started snowboarding together. Thought we were like the coolest kids on the block. You know, you just feel amazing on a snowboard, even though you're doing nothing compared to like legit snowboarders. But for us, it was a start. And so we had like some big hills on his property. He kind of lived on a mini farm. So it was a rural area, but there were some really, really big hills like back in the woods. So we would go back there and build ramps and snowboard. And then I remember just being at my grandparents' house, which was more like in a suburban area, but they also had a little hill and it was like right down by the road. And I think I've even shared this before. I remember being with my cousins who were like my best friends growing up. And we tried to do like the most dramatic crashes when cars would come by. So we would wait until like cars would be coming down the road and then we would go down the hill and just try to just totally wipe out just to see if we could get the attention of drivers going by. But yeah, a lot of good memories like that. I mean, who doesn't remember waiting to see if your county was on the bottom of the screen on the news channel to see if you got a snow day? Like those moments of anticipation were, great.
Every story you tell me of you as a kid, I can 100% picture it because of your son. Like your boys,
it's like
both of them
V.
actually, V and Luke look so much like you.
That's funny.
That in my mind, I just picture it. And even their personalities, I could see them doing that and just laughing so hard.
100% for sure.
I have a couple. I mean, one of them, when I was in high school, we were lucky, blessed that our high school was a private school, but we would go to a winter retreat every year in the winter for a few days. Like the entire high school would go. And I dated Mary during that time. And I just remember some of my favorite memories because they had a giant sled hill that you could go on. It was like so much fun. And just a lot of the winter stuff it was fun. It was fun to wear the winter clothes and to have those experiences. But then the other one as an adult, when my kids were younger, so this was the week that Frozen came out the first time, the very first Frozen. There was a snow day. And so the kids were off, I was off of work, and we have a very steep driveway. And I remember we went out and went sledding down our driveway. And as little kids, that feels even bigger. And then we went from there to Pickerington to go to Marcus Theater, and we saw Frozen. But actually before that, we went to Five Guys, which was one of my favorite restaurants. We went there. It was Tuesday for some reason. It was like cheaper tickets, free popcorn. And we all saw, and on the big theater, Frozen, which I really enjoyed. And that whole experience is still one of my absolute favorite memory days of my life as a parent. So
that's awesome.
A lot of fun. All right. So today's question, I think, I mean, I could be wrong on this, But when I think back on our podcast, on all the different topics that we cover, I think it's really rare for me. I don't say this with any type of arrogance, but I think it's very rare for us to cover a topic that I don't have a very clear opinion of in my head right away.
Yeah.
Today is not so confident. It's in my mind, this topic is one that honestly, it was submitted by someone that listens to our podcast, goes to our church, submitted it. It's a great question. But when I read it, it was like one of the first times where, like, as I looked at it, I thought, like, I don't know how I think about this. And then the more I thought about it, I was like, I don't know how I think about this. And then I remember when I floated it to you two guys, just like we had like a few different topics. And I said, this is like a few weeks ago, we were just looking at over the schedule. Then I said, here's a couple of topics. And I remember when I said it, both of your body language was the exact same as me. You both kind of went, And it was like, do we want to touch that or not? So I'm not trying to make this more dramatic, but what I'm saying about it is, I don't think our discussion today is as much giving a direct answer as I think it is. And I think where people that engage our podcast, they enjoy about this is we're giving them a framework to how to view things, how to think about things, so to process it in a healthy way. So let me read the question, and then we're just going to see where we go. Honestly, this could be a very good discussion, as we often joke. This could be a very lame discussion. I don't know. But here's a question. It says, as I'm opening myself up to the wisdom and calling of God, a question keeps popping up in my head. Is it possible that God would call me to move or to make an employment change in my life that would be received as a conflict with my wife? An instance where God says, go here, but my wife would say no. We can't go because I love my job, or we can't leave because my parents are getting old and we need to be close by. Will God put a calling on me that creates conflict with my spouse? All right. Solve it, guys. Answer the question. No. So here's what I would love to do. Let's just let's hit this in layers if we could. The first one is, let's just talk calling in the sense of, like, what does that look like? I mean, is he calling us to specific places, doing specific things? Is it more general? Is it obedience, or is it a specificity to it? So when you guys think about calling, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, when I've talked to people about that issue, I've always said I think there's a sense in which we both have a general and a specific calling. So the general calling that I would say would be, as Christians, and even really I would say foundationally as a human being, right? Like there's a sense in which we were created by God for a purpose. If you want to wrap it up even in the Great Commandments, right? Like the idea that we're created to love God and love people. We're created by a relational God to be relational beings. So there's a sense in which, as human beings, that is at the center, right? To relate to God, to relate to one another, to love God, to love others. And so there's a general call to that. And then I would say, it's still in a general way, it has a more specific flair as Christians, right? Because we are called to fulfill the Great Commission. And so there's a sense in which we are called to love God and love people. One of the ways that we love people is by pointing them to Christ in our words, in our deeds. We want to bear witness to him. That's the word that Jesus used, right? When he sent out his disciples in Acts chapter 1, you're going to be my witnesses. So I think that is the call of every single Christian, regardless of where you live, regardless of what you do vocationally. I mean, you name it, regardless of how old you are, regardless if you're married or single. I think that is the call of every Christian. Now, I think it becomes more specific in the sense of, how does that actually manifest itself, right? So this is where it shows up in the sense of where you live, where you work. I think those things take on a more specific flair to them. And that's where I think God maybe gives us more distinct direction in what that can look like for us. So in fulfilling the Great Commission, in fulfilling these great commandments that God has given to us, what does that actually look like where God has placed me? And sometimes that does entail things like God giving us direction, maybe a change of career, or a change, like a move, in the sense of calling us to move somewhere. We feel like he's leading us in this direction. So I do think, without belaboring that point, I do think there is a sense in which all Christians have a general and a specific call on their lives.
I was just going to say, I agree 100% with what you're saying. Like, and I think as our lives unfold, I think we are walked into different roles that will inhabit different callings. So this specific question is talking about marriage. And so, like, as a husband, you have a specific calling from God as a husband to love your spouse. You become a parent, you now have a specific call on your life to love and raise your children. So same thing, like if you get a job, you get whatnot, like all those things where specificity starts to play out kind of as life develops for you and the decisions that you're making, hopefully in counsel with the Holy Spirit. Hopefully you're seeking God as you're making those decisions. But I think like as those roles play out, the general nature of our calling finds those details, and those details start to fill in. The one thing I was going to say was like, I think a lot of times people have in their mind that calling is God's calling on our lives, especially in the specificity of things, is one thing all the time. And I think that is constantly shifting. God is constantly working. Now, and what I mean is like, just because that you had this opportunity at one point in your life doesn't mean that God won't call you to something different later on in life. And so like, I think people, we look at our skills, we look at our talents, our abilities, like all of these things, and we go, God has designed me for this one thing. And that might be true for the season that you're in, but he also might have something else for you later on. And so like, I think God is constantly speaking to us and working with us. And it is that it's in relationship with God, we are trying to discover what he wants in this moment right now. And I think we're called to constantly be seeking God, to go, God, what do you want me to do today? God, what do you want me to do in this season of my life? What do you want me to do tomorrow? But knowing that at any point in time, God could shift what that is.
How do you think we navigate deciphering what is God's calling versus our own desires? Because I mean, I think I say this not in any way to sound arrogant, but I think all three of us as pastors have had conversations where people will say things like, God's calling me to do this. And for us, from a spiritual leadership position, we're kind of like, I don't think God is. You know what I'm talking about? Again, I'm not saying that's a common thing. We're not saying that in an arrogant way, but you're like, I feel like that's probably your own desire and what you want. If someone is kind of struggling with that, I mean, how do they navigate that? What would be your advice to them?
Yeah, I mean, I always, whether this framework is right or wrong, this is the framework that I've always used. And I think I've even brought this up on the podcast before. But for me, it's really the intersection of things like gifting, opportunity, and what I would call like passion. And so in the sense of, that doesn't mean there isn't reluctance. It doesn't mean you're not weighing the cost, but I think it's the alignment of those things. So God has created you in a certain way. He's given you a certain personality, certain giftings, that whether you discover naturally, like this is where we get into some little dicier territory in the sense of like spiritual gifts versus physical or natural gifts that God has given you that can be used for spiritual things. But I think there's a sense in which the thing that God calls you to, there's doors that he opens, right? We talked recently, and I kind of use the language of not kicking down doors. Right. If you're having to kick down doors, that's probably not something God is calling you towards. He's going to open those doors. He's going to make that apparent to you. There's going to be a stirring in your spirit, as I would say. And then there's going to be those open doors. There's going to be gifts that go with it that make you competent through God's provision for you to be able to do those things. And then I think passion, and what I mean by passion, there's a sense of fulfillment in it, right? There's a sense of rightness in that this is what God has created me to do. There's a sense of alignment with where God has led you. So I think at times there are people that like the idea of things, whether because it receives the praise of people, whether it looks like something that from maybe a worldly sense is like, oh, that would be a really, really cool thing to do, or they like the idea of these things, but that doesn't necessarily mean God is calling you to do that. And I think all of it, as you were saying earlier, like the foundation of it is really a surrendered posture to God each and every day in prayer that says, you know, Lord, I really would like to do this, or Lord, I really feel like you're leading me to this. Would you continue to give me clarity? Would you continue to give me discernment? And I think a part of even what I was saying earlier with things like gifting and opportunity, a lot of times it's not just inward, it's also external. So there is a community sense of this where you're going to collectively have discernment. Maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's a group of friends, maybe it's people in your connect group, maybe it's your pastor, but other people are going to be able to affirm some of those things in your life that gives you a greater clarity and discernment in maybe where God is leading you to go.
This is a different example, and many people might not feel, may not see the spiritual nature of it, but for this was the process for me in building our house. I first started with a desire to build to build a house for my family to be able to do that. And so what started as a desire gave way to both conversations with people that allowed for me to discern whether it was going to be a possibility or not. Like there were people in my life who were going, yeah, this is totally doable. This is something that you could look at. So my desire, my passion started to meet with different opportunities that I had, which started to meet with other people in my life. Again, other people speaking into that and encouraging and fostering that in for my family. And so like, as I went through this process, the thing that I had to overcome was like, I always said, well, if it's my desire, it's wrong. You know what I mean? And so I automatically negated it because it was something that I wanted.
Yeah.
And so like, I think too, we have to just watch how they interplay.
Yeah.
Because our desires aren't always bad. Sometimes our desires are wrong and they lead us to kick down doors.
Yeah.
But sometimes they lead us right into the thing that God wants to do. And so I think we have to hold desires with open hands until we start to see it being confirmed through the Word of God, through other people, and then through are we given those opportunities to step into the thing that we desire? And if it's not, I mean, I went to school, Malone, for my undergrad to do ministry. I didn't touch ministry until I was almost 30 years old. So I graduated when I was 22. So there's 7 years difference between when I felt God call me to something and when I was actually, and even then, I don't know that I was ready to step into it. I had a lot of still have a lot of growing to do with it. You know what I mean? But there can be time in between what you feel is your passion and when those opportunities finally come along.
All right. So in life, we're kind of talking about this more from individualistic perspective. But the question really is one about marriage. What does calling look like as two people get married? Even as we look at the scriptures, is God still speaking individually? How is he speaking individually? Is he speaking as a couple? Is he speaking always in unity to both? So let's go to the ideal first before we talk about potential negative or conflict. What's the ideal situation from what we understand? How is calling look different once you're married?
I think ideally God aligns both of your hearts and you both are following the thing that God wants you to do. And I think confirmation comes if one presents an idea, even if there's an individual calling that gets presented, talked about, prayed through, and then together your hearts unite under the feeling that God has called you to something. I mean, in the perfect world, I feel like that's how it happens. And that, to me, I think the husband or the wife could experience that initial calling, but I think at some point, like, I'm not going to go into the unideal because you said the ideal.
Yeah.
So, but I think that's the best way that it happens. If not, God speaking to both of you, saying, and you both having the sense coming into it, but some form of like unity in it, where there's confirmation from both parties. That God is, especially if it's something like he's talking about, a change of job, a change of location, something that would affect the family as a whole, not just the individual person.
Yeah, I think it's, and I agree with what you said. I think it's important for people to know that even if there is unity, which I think is absolutely the ideal, right? Like the Bible is clear that in marriage, you are one, but that doesn't necessarily mean like if one of you is called to do something, God is calling one of you to do something, that just means immediately there's no discernment. It's just, okay, I guess we have to do it. I think that it oftentimes is a process, and it's not that both of you had a dream on one Tuesday night and both of you woke up and said, did you have that dream? Yeah, I had that dream. Okay, great. That would be great.
Happen.
That would be great. You know, I mean, yeah, I'm sure it has, but I think a lot of times you might see, one spouse is a little bit more hesitant or reluctant than the other, or they're not maybe as clear because God has been speaking one thing to one of them for a while, and maybe they could see it, maybe they're open to it, but there is a time or a season or a process of discernment and using wisdom to calculate through prayer, like what does this look like Why do we maybe sense God is leading us towards this? What are the variables that maybe would either confirm or deny? Is this just something that in my ideal world I would love to do? Or is this something God is leading us to do? And oftentimes, but not always, there are things that cause hesitancy, right? Because there's a sacrifice involved. It might be moving. It might be giving up something that is comfortable, something that's convenient, something you're used to, something that seems like security. Again, not always. It doesn't mean that the calling of God is always radically uncomfortable, but a lot of times there are uncomfortable elements in it that cause us to have to step out. And so that can be, depending on, one spouse or the other, right? That can be a scary thing, or scarier for one spouse over the other, depending on where they were. And I know we're getting into the other side of it now, but I think there's a lot of things that factor into this, because it is possible that one spouse is very much in tune with the Spirit. In other words, they are actively seeking God, and maybe the other one isn't as much. And that's something where maybe they need to grow in. And so there is some hesitancy in that. So that's what I would say. I would agree. It is the ideal. It might start with one person. They're bringing it to the table. They're talking through it. They're praying about it. They're collectively trying to discern as a unit what that would look like for them. And
I was going to say ideal number two, if there is a second option, it would be still, even if there's hesitancy on one party, that there is a level of trust and love between the two, that the one who doesn't catch vision for what God's doing goes, I don't see that, but I love you and I trust you that you are seeking God. And so I think there is concession for like, and there's been many times where like Cass and I have had conversations, and I'm like, I really feel like God's calling us to do this. She's like, I don't see it, but here's what I trust you. And I believe that you're seeking God on this. I don't have a leading on it. So let's do what you're saying. And so I think that is also can happen in the ideal situation, because what's happening is there's still unity in the marriage. It's not being ripped apart. It's something where you're both still going the same direction, although one might just be following in trust, not in their own personal experience with God.
Okay, so that is somewhat leading me. I want to stay on this just for a little bit longer, and then it's kind of leading into the next part. One of the things that I think we recognize is, so what you were just saying, that trust equity that you build up with your spouse, that really does have to be earned and over time. I think we've all seen the negative examples where one spouse is trying to play the God card of saying, God said, therefore we must do. And they don't have a track record or credibility with their spouse. So maybe they have the track record has just been bad. They've heard from God and it's been a disaster, heard from God, it's been a disaster, or they have heard from God and it's been pretty obvious. It's just their own selfish desire for what they wanted to do. So I don't want to jump into the negative yet. I want to stay in the positive for a moment. All three of us at some point have made a radical life changing decision, and our spouses were a part of it. All of us have many. The ones I'm thinking of is you leaving Northern Ohio to come to Lancaster, you quitting your job to pursue ministry initially as an intern. These are radical things. For me, it was leaving Detroit, coming here. What did that look like in your marriage? How did you guys navigate that? Was that something God spoke to both of you initially? Was it to one of you initially? Once God spoke it to you, how did you introduce that to your spouse? What was the way that you guys processed it together? Was it like an introduction, think about it and pray about it? Was it this is what we're doing, get used to it? Like, I know, knowing you guys, I don't think that was the case, but just help people to navigate, like, what did that conversation look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's usually when one person, in our case, so over the years, more than just moving here, there was a couple instances of this throughout our marriage. I think sometimes I brought it up, sometimes she brought it up, but usually it's kind of like putting feelers out there, right? It's like, I'm having this sense, like this is something that's kind of been on my heart. What do you think about this? Like, what is your knee-jerk reaction? And I think it just starts with a conversation to say, I don't feel that at all. Or in our case, most of the time it has been, I sense that as well. I don't know what that looks like.
Can I pause there? So in your relationship, what you're saying is it was an ongoing rhythm of spiritual conversations.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the only time you talk about spiritual things is we're moving states.
Exactly.
It's ongoing so that you have this rhythm in your relationship.
Yeah. And I think apart from that, that's just good marriage advice, right? To be able to check in where you are, how you're doing emotionally, how you're doing in your marriage, how you're doing spiritually, what's God been speaking to you, what's been stirring, like all of those conversations. I think having a healthy rhythm of that is a part of even that credibility. Like being able to have real conversations in your marriage about life-altering decisions. So for us, it was a lot of times it was, someone bringing that up and saying, I'm getting the initial sense of that as well. I have very little clarity on what that means, right? And so almost kickstarting that conversation, which then gives way to, okay, let's pray about this. Let's pray about this together. Let's pray about this individually. Let's be seeking God. And then as we sense God doing something, as we sense in our spirits, I feel like it's time. I feel like there's a release. I feel like we're coming to the end of this season, this journey. And I think this is where it's, I think, confusing or even maybe scary for people. Because even when we use those words like feel, all I can say is I think of like Paul, I think it's in Romans 8 where he talks about, God's spirit bears witness to our spirit. There's this sense in which we have these internal, like when we are surrendering ourselves to God in prayer consistently, that we have to be able to trust this isn't just a knee-jerk thing. This isn't, and even being able to say to God, I don't want this just to be my plan. I don't want this just to be my desire. God, if it is, make that abundantly clear to me, So being able to surrender all of the variables and factors into that. But I think starting with that conversation, being open and honest, committing yourself to a season of prayer until you feel like that clarity, and continuously checking in throughout that process to where you get to the point to say, okay, I think it's time. Like, I feel a sense that God has released us from this specific, assignment here at this church or whatever it is. And we need to now talk about what that looks like. And so that's really been our process. And for us, I can't say we've ever been at a place where we've been completely at odds. Again, there might be a time where one of us is lagging behind a little bit. But when we have committed to that process of talking about it, even thinking through some of the practical implications, but more importantly, committing to both pray about it, I think the grace of God brings that unity and alignment over time when you are fully committed to surrendering whatever that is to Him and putting your marriage and your family in His hands. For us, that's just always been kind of the rhythm that we've used.
Yeah, I think for us is very similar, but I think what was funny for me, like even thinking about the idea of going into ministry without Cass, it would not have happened. Like without her coming to a place where she agreed, first and foremost, because if she did not go back to work full time, there was no shot. Like I couldn't have quit our job, my job. And so like her being willing to step into a role where I stayed home with the kids and then intern twice a week. So she took her only 2 days off the week so that I could come into the church and intern, and she worked full time the rest of the time. And so like there was this there was an immense sacrifice on her part. And so like for us, it had to be yes, we're both in this. You know what I mean? And to my wife's to my wife's praise, she has always modeled love for me, and she believes in me sometimes more than I believe in myself. And so like she knew that ministry was an important part, and she knew that I had avoided it for however many years. And she created space and an opportunity for me to pursue what that looked like, but also know that it might not work out. And so like she was comfortable, I should say she was comfortable enough to go along with it. You know what I mean? And right. So like, and the other part of it was too, like for us, it was a discernment process. Now, most people know that I started interning here in 2000. It was the summer of 2008, I think I started. Well, the winter of 2008, we had put our house on the market and was looking for places up in Northeast Ohio. My ministry context was Northeast Ohio, and I'd grown up there. And so like we were, after many years of frustration, many years of like just not sure with what we were doing, we had plans to move back up to Northeast Ohio. And I think it would have broke my wife's heart, and I think God knew that. You know what I mean? So because her family's here, and so like we put our house on the market. We had 0 hits, like none. Like the market tanked. God might have tanked the market to keep me in Lancaster, Ohio. You know what I mean? And so like so being able to walk through that process and then step into a place where the summertime where talking with Matthew and talking with the lead pastor at the time, being able to come on and intern, I think it was both God confirming in her heart, like that there's a place here where both her dreams of being near her family and my dreams being of being in ministry could coincide.
Mm.
And so like just seeing God play that out really was a beautiful thing. And a lot of it was desire. A lot of it was like opportunity and how that kind of all played out. But it all took both of us being willing to go, okay, God, I hear that you're stirring something in us, but what does this look like?
Mm-hmm.
And letting him shape that process.
Yeah. I mean, for Mary and I, this is, I would say, the ideal in the sense that we established this rhythm in our marriage actually before we were married. So when we were in high school, we dated, and then in college, we realized if we stayed together and dating, we're heading toward marriage. And so we actually took a season off into my freshman year of college with the idea of let's pray to see, like, are we both willing to surrender our lives that wherever God calls, that's where we're going to go. Because I had told her, I said, I feel called to ministry, which means I don't know what that looks like. If God calls me to a different state, different country, I'm going to go. But I didn't want to assume that she would follow and be okay with that. So we took some time off. And so when we came back together and I just asked her, she said, yeah, I'm comfortable to follow wherever God calls. So that it was nice for us just to simply establish that of like, this is our value, not my value. Yeah. It's our value. Our value is we're going to follow God. So initially it was, I went to Bible college and then I took a job at my dad's church, and that's where we went. We were both on board with that. But then when God called us to go to Ohio, to where we are today, that was, it was a relational conversation that went over many months. It started with just what I told her. God is stirring my heart to take a step of faith. I don't know what that means. Let's start praying. And so we started praying. And then the months later, I said, all right, God just spoke to me. Today's the day. She goes, what does that mean? I go, I don't know. I just know we need to start making steps. Like, we need to start planning and working toward it. Next day led to a conversation that led to a job interview here. A couple weeks later, came down after that and got hired. But we had just talked about that, prayed about that. And even when I went to the job interview, afterwards, we talked about that together. We prayed about that together. We discussed it. And so I didn't have a context of me viewing it as God speaking to me. It was God speaking to us. And that's what her context was. And I think in that, she was so honored by that too, that it never felt like I was running out ahead saying, will you catch up? Or running after something solely that I wanted. It was like, what is God, what is he calling us to do? And I think that was why it worked out so well for us. And now that's just our natural rhythm. It's just to consistently talk about it. Even when I was offered the lead pastor job here, I knew what I wanted. To me, it was like a no-brainer. Like, yeah, I have invested quite a bit. I want to do this, but I wanted her to be excited. And so I went to her and talked to her, and she prayed about it. And she was like, yeah, that's actually a funny story. I said, she goes, what's it going to take? I said, I think I'm going to have to work 6 days a week for a couple of years. I said, I just think it's going to take a lot of work. I was still learning how to like really teach adults well and stuff. And so after 2 years, she came to me like politely. She said, you said 2 years, 6 days a week. It's well beyond 2 years now at this point, and you're still working 6 days a week. And I remember I was like, okay, I have been rebuked. I hear that. I received that. I started cutting back on that. Okay, so we've not in a sense to try to raise ourselves up, but we have talked about somewhat the ideal. We've been blessed to have that situation. Let's just be honest now. Not everyone's going to be in that situation. You're going to have situations where both are followers, but one's in obedience and one's in disobedience. Both are followers. One's hearing from God, one's not. So kind of maybe the same thing. You're going to have situations where maybe one's a follower and one's not. And so as a result, there's going to be division there. How do you suggest that someone navigates that? I don't, for today's conversation, I don't want to get deep into the conversation of headship. Not in the sense I'm willing to wanting to avoid that as much as I think that is a whole podcast topic to do it justice. But what would be your suggestions for a person to navigate that? They've heard from God, and let's just say their spouse is in rebellion. That's the part of it when you, for me, I read that, I go, that question, I'm like, yeah. You guys feel that too?
Oh, yeah.
Like
100%.
Like, all right. What's 100%. Your thoughts?
Okay. So this might be the unpopular, and this is where it gets kind of like we're delving into Chris's opinion at this point, but I still think, our vocational calling when we are married, our calling as spouses trumps vocational calling. And God might be shaping something in your heart that he's calling you to do. But I do think that there's the same God who put that calling in your heart will also pave the way and make the way for it to happen, where it won't be not a tension point. Because I think God oftentimes brings us to places where there's tension in our marriage, or where there's potential for tension. I'll say it that way. I don't think that's the disqualifier, but where he'll pave the way to make the opportunities happen where it could bring the spouse's heart along at some point. And so like, I don't think God wants to set us up for constant disunity in our marriage. You know what I mean? And so like, I do think there might have to be times where like you are either patient and you wait for God to open the door and to change your spouse's heart, or you have to take steps of faith in a way that your spouse is comfortable, knowing and trusting that God will continue to make a way for you if that is your calling in life. Because again, I think you have the opportunity in honoring your spouse and their fears, not in allowing them to be in rebellion of God, but honoring them in their in discovering like what are the things down deep that are driving their resistance to what God is doing. I think you give an opportunity to love them. I think about this with the unequally yoked couple. Oftentimes we'll talk to unequally yoked partners that one wants to tithe, the other one does not. And the other one is not a believer, has no context for why tithing is important. In the ideal world, they would have the husband would say to the wife, or the wife to the husband, the unbeliever to the believer, that you can handle your finances however you want and you can honor God your way, but I'm not going to with mine. But that doesn't always happen. So I think, again, Paul's call there is honor your spouse so that through your love for them and through your honor of them, they might see Christ's love in that and come to become a believer. And I think even when in a rebellious, a believing rebellious, like I think it's the same thing. You have an opportunity to show love and deference to your spouse, while knowing what your heart desires and what you feel like God is calling you to. It's almost like releasing that calling back to God and say, okay, we've been united in this. So God, you got to make the way in this, because if you don't, this is going to be a constant tension in our relationship. And I don't feel like that's what you want for us. I think temporal tension, possibly. Ongoing, like never reconcilable because you've taken a step that they just will not abide. I don't know that that's God's design for marriage.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I'm in a very similar place as I'm thinking about this real time and processing in my mind. I think the idea in my mind is really the tension. Like on the surface, it feels like, are you going to be faithful to God or are you going to be unfaithful to God? Right. But it's really not that tension, because part of being faithful to God is being faithful to your spouse, right? And loving them well. So I think that's really where the tension is how, if God is calling me, how does he provide? How does he open this door? How does he make this way happen? And I think that is where God understands our limitations. He understands our humanity. He understands even the tension in our own hearts of being in a situation where we say, man, I really want to do this. I really feel like God's leading me to do this, but my wife is just not there. And what I can't do is just blow up my marriage through domination and say, here's what we're doing, right? Because if they're not a believer, number one, that is one way to definitely not lead them to the Lord. But number two, it's going to cause serious tension and potentially problems, and potentially, worst case, it maybe leads to divorce, depending on how big the problems become in that marriage. You're not honoring your spouse at all. The difficulty, though, I think, is where if their spouse does not have a desire to honor the Lord, or that's not their chief desire, that's where the real tension arises. And so it's that middle ground of, how can I faithfully honor the Lord while faithfully honoring my spouse? Yeah. And again, I like what you said. I think there's a sense in which you try to fulfill that as much as you can where you are within that context. It's much like we've talked about before. If you're in a vocation where you think, man, this feels like a dead end job, I'm not satisfied. I don't feel a sense of purpose. We would still say to the believer, like, be faithful where God has placed you, right? Be faithful in a situation that is not ideal.
Yeah.
Faithfulness is not just assuming in only ideal situations. The reality is we live in a broken world. Most of our situations are not perfectly ideal. And so I think there is a sense in which God in his grace and his compassion can work on your spouse's heart. They can, and even if not full radical change to say, okay, I'm 100% on board, through your grace, through your compassion, through your humility, through your gentleness and your patience. And God knows our hearts. He knows the desires of our hearts when we want to honor him and when we surrender those situations to him. And who knows, it could be the best of both worlds, where not only where you're able to fully follow after the calling he has for you, but you're able to bring your spouse along with you, and they're fully included in that in a way that they would not have been had you pulled the rank card or again, been domineering in your approach to that. So I think regardless of how it's done, it has to be done in a posture of humility, with patience, with wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think when we give those situations that are not ideal to God to say, Lord, I would do this today if it felt like it was within my ability to do so. It doesn't feel that way. God, I'm giving this situation to you. I'm asking that you would just provide, even in the season, a temporary solution to be able to serve you in this capacity, even if it's not fully where I feel like you're leading us in the long run.
Yeah, I think all three of us are on the same page with that. I think that's when I was trying to process through this question, and I've actually had this question for multiple weeks. In my mind, I just couldn't think of a situation where God would place a calling above a marriage. I mean, and the scriptures are hard to look at because the scriptures are so patriarchal that you're not going to get very much of like the insight of a couple discussing something, debating it back and forth. But when you look at the heart of Christ and the value he's placed on marriage, and even I would say a lot of even what Paul talked about marriage, it really is a posture of serving and loving, and you don't see a posture of dominance celebrated. So I think all the things you guys said is so well said, that you get to a place where you go, okay, God, I know what you're calling me to do. There's this resistance that I can't overcome right now. So I need you to do it, but use me to minister. And so like that becomes the ministry of like, I want to help my spouse get there. And so like, for me, that's like my next question to you guys is a person that's navigating that. What are the to-do things that you would recommend, what in our modern day language, the green flags, like the things that you would say, like, yes, keep this behavior. This is a healthy thing so that you can build that credibility. Because let's just be honest, if you haven't had a rhythm of spiritual conversations in your marriage, and then you drop it on your spouse, God's calling us to move, that is going to rock the foundation. But that doesn't mean you can't build that credibility over time. So what are the good things, the to-dos that you would recommend? And then I'm going to follow that up with the negative. What are the red flags? What are the things like language not to use, behaviors not to do?
I would say green flags are always inviting your spouse into the conversation. So when you're having these types of, you said, making spiritual conversations a norm of your house. So when you have those spiritual conversations, though, it's not, hey, God said we have to do this, let's go do it. It's hey, like you said earlier, I sense that God's doing this, and I don't know how that hits you. Let's take some time and pray about it, think about it. Do you think like that's something that you could do? And if they have no context, like they're not a believer or whatnot, I think you begin the prayer. I think you begin that conversation with, hey, you know, my faith is important to me. This is a vital part of my life, and I believe this to be true, and I believe that God guides us at times. And so I feel like this. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think about that? And you know what? The initial reaction might not be great. And so the practice there is giving them the space. The green flag is giving them space and time to process it. Because that's not their conviction. It's not what they hold to be true. And the other thing I would say, the green flag is serve your spouse. Not to get your way, but because that is the practice that God's called us to do anyhow. And honestly, the small things that we do that are faithful, that oftentimes show others love, especially in our marriage, learning to die to yourself, learning to serve put the other above yourself and serve them, learning to love them well in a way that elevates them the way that Christ elevates the church. if you're doing those things, those are character things that you need for whatever it is God's calling you to do. So it's a training place. So if you're doing those things in your marriage in a not ideal situation where maybe it's not being reciprocated, or maybe they're not seeing it the same way, congratulations, God is training you for whatever it is that he's calling you to do. So I would say do those things. Keep serving, keep loving, keep submitting to one another.
Yeah, I think it's summed up in, be faithful in that waiting season, right?
Yeah.
Be faithful to your spouse through loving them, serving them, praying for them, and even maybe inviting them to pray. Like there are those starter conversations. Again, there's a large spectrum. Maybe there's some that would say they're a Christian. Maybe they come to church, but maybe they're not doing personal devotions. They don't have a prayer life. There's a huge spectrum of where people might be spiritually, but you might even say, hey, would you be willing to pray with me? Like invite them into a moment of prayer. Like, can we just pray about this? And those might be tiny baby steps to get them to a place where they're even open to that reality, that like they're seeking God's guidance, and that becomes a part of your marriage and even for the direction of your family. The other thing I would say would be to guard against resentment, just like in any other area of marriage. If you feel like your spouse is letting you down or in some way is keeping something that you feel like you want or you need, resentment can creep in, right? And to where you become, standoffish, and your resentment starts to bleed into the way that you communicate or the way that you treat them. Again, just realize that is not going to accomplish the purposes of God. So that's on the negative side of what you were saying, serving your spouse. But again, realizing it's not a ulterior motive. I'm not doing this to get something. I'm doing this because this is the person God has entrusted me to love, and this is the season I'm in. And even though they don't see what I feel like God is giving me a vision for, I'm called to love them in the here and now for however long that looks. I have to be faithful in that. And so I would say another part of that would be, guarding against resentment and just realize that it might be a season where it takes great patience in the waiting. And I think we can be so quick to rush or manipulate God's timing, especially if we feel like, well, God is calling me to do this. Let's try to somehow speed this up or manipulate it, and just be careful that can also cause problems if you're not doing what you need to be doing in that season.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you guys are saying. I do strongly believe in loving and serving them builds that credibility, not just as a means to an end, but just because you love them and you want to serve them and you're called to do that. I think that is oftentimes where the tension lies, is if I come to you and say, I feel like God's calling me to do something, and I've never taken a posture of service toward you, then it feels very self-serving. Because even though God is the one calling me, it feels like I want to do what I want to do and God's calling me to do this. Whereas if I have built such credibility with my spouse, like they're just so confident that my posture has been or has consistently recently been to love and to serve, then this is going to be an extension of that, where they think, okay, this is just you still loving me, serving our family. Then I want to do that. But I strongly agree with you about the resentment thing. I think I have to be careful of that, not necessarily in the specifics of this, but honestly, if I don't get what I want, I can be that person that pouts or resents.
Yeah,
like I know that I have that tendency, and I've had to learn to, like, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And I would say even this ties into the next part I want to talk about, is like, I don't want to, if I invite my spouse into the conversation, if they have questions or pushback, to immediately get upset, to resent them, because if I have to force them to buck up in order to share their opinion, then I'm not really inviting them in the conversation. I'm inviting them to agree with me. Right. And if you don't agree with me, then there's a consequence, there's punishment. So let's go to the other side. All the things you guys said are great. What's the negative? What's the things that you would just say, hey, don't do that? The more you do this, the more you're going to hurt your credibility, hurt the situation.
Yeah. Okay. So resentment, I would say, showing that in outward ways, right? Harping on them. I think just being over the top, like overdoing it to where it becomes weaponized, right?
Yeah.
And
sending them sermons on that topic, nonstop.
I mean, but there are people who will do that stuff.
No,
right?
I know.
And
I'm
again,
being serious.
Yeah. And if they don't have
another article about this, here's another blog.
100%. If they don't have ears to hear it, all you're doing is building up resentment in them towards you. And so I think that's the other side of that is, again, what are the things that are going to be disarming to them? So I think, again, part of that is, I don't really know what else negative other than, allowing resentment to creep into your way of viewing them and treating them. harping on them, being overbearing about the issue, not giving them time to process, or as you said, I think not allowing them to feel the potential realities of what that might entail, right? Like to somehow be offended that they would be, have some pushback, that their entire life might be upended because of this move or whatever the situation might be. So I think giving them the grace, or in this case, I would say not being gracious towards their emotions or towards their questions and their desire to understand. And so I think having a closed mind, like, I think you can be faithful to God, you can listen to God, you can seek God while also being understanding and compassionate towards somebody who's just not there. So I think any type of behavior that shuts down their questions, shuts down conversations, shuts down an openness towards them, whether that be in your willingness to be loving, affectionate, serving them, or whether that be in, again, their potential pushback about the thing, anything that closes off that relationship is going to be a detrimental, and it's going to not work in your favor. It's going to do the opposite. It's going to work against you wanting to be faithful to God. Like, God never uses those types of means to accomplish his purposes. And I think that's important to understand is we do that, right? We want to use manipulation. We want to use force. We want to do all of those things to get our way. And I think we have to really be careful about that. I actually think that's a part of like bearing God's name in vain, like where we're saying in the name of God, I'm doing these things that are actually harmful to you or to our marriage. I think we have to be really careful about that.
I was just going to say, I think so often we get caught into the things God calls us to do, and we forget that the number one thing that God is concerned about is the person that we are becoming, not the thing that we're doing.
Yeah, that's good.
And the thing that we're doing is important. And I think God does have tasks and specific things for us, but never at the cost of the person that he's transforming us to become. And so like we can become the person that God wants us to be while we wait patiently for our spouse to come alongside of us. If we push through and manipulate and do everything that we can to get our way, I think it's indicative of our hearts and our impatience. And even we might be looking at this ministry opportunity for the wrong things. And so if we can't be patient in the process, I think we have to go back and we have to go, okay, God, where am I missing in my, like, what's wrong in me that this is do or die right now? You know what I mean? Like, what do you need to shift or change in me? And that can become dangerous things. I mean, we read the reports, we look at all the news articles of pastors and church leaders and even like world leaders who fail. And what is it? They had disordered desires that they kept grasping onto and pushing through, when God was like, I want to transform your heart, not just accomplish something through you.
Yeah.
Right. So. Yeah. I think some of the red flags I would say is constantly playing God said as like the trump card on everything. I was just like that, because I think even if you do feel like you're hearing from God, I would be cautious to always do that, because you're going to, I think in an impatient way, wound your spouse, because you're going to, what's being implied is God speaking to me, it's not speaking to you. You need to listen to me and trust me. And so I think you gotta be careful how you say that. I think if you believe in male headship as the authority in marriage, and I'm not arguing with that, I'm just saying, if you believe that, constantly playing that card, well, I'm the head of the home. I mean, like, I'll just say this, I've been married going on 25 years this July. I haven't had to play that card yet of just saying like, well,
me either.
I'm the head of the home and this is what we're doing. Now, there have been times that we have disagreed, and through conversation, we've come to a place and she'll say, well, I'm going to defer to you,
right? But
I've never had to do that. So maybe others have, but I'm just trying to encourage, if you're using that consistently, I think this is one. I think people not owning their own past bad decisions hurts and is a red flag. If you can't say to your spouse, you know what? I was wrong. I made a bad decision. Like I shared some of my failures in the past. I bought a motorcycle years ago that I shouldn't have in a season that our finances we didn't have enough margin, and I bought it and I loved it. I miss it. I would buy it again if I could. And it was the wrong time. And I lost credibility with Mary during that season. And I knew I did. And so I've had to confess that. I've had other purchases throughout time where Money's not a big deal to me. I don't find peace and comfort in money. Mary does, not in the sense that she needs money, but like having order and having discipline. I never respected that early on in our marriage. And so like, I had to own that. I had to say, you know what, I need to be more disciplined. And I have now in our marriage, but I had to learn that, but I had to acknowledge the past mistakes. And I think people who are unwilling to do that constantly damage the marriage. And I think you can actually build credibility that way. And then the other one, I've already said it, but I'm going to say it again, just forcing your spouse to always buck up in order to have to be heard, I think is so it's so unloving to say like, in order for you to be heard, you have to argue with me, and I won't just give you a safe place to share your thoughts, your feelings, and to value your opinion. And you see that a lot of times if one spouse is more domineering, they just shut the other one down and they think, well, I'm such the strong leader, I'm giving this service to our marriage by leading. And it's like, no, you just shut down your spouse. And I think that's tough. Okay, here's the last thing I want to end with. And I don't know that we'll be able to solve this. What happens if you have a couple that comes together? They love each other. They love God. They're just at a gridlock. They just don't know how to make the decision of what to do. One feels this way, one feels this way, or maybe they both just don't have a strong enough leading and they know they need to make a decision. What would be some practical things you could advise them in their life, maybe getting counsel, or what process would you guys go through?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing we haven't talked about a ton would be, you said counsel. I think wise counsel, right? Community, faith leaders. So yeah, meeting with your pastor, talking with close godly friends who have the same worldview and are who believe in seeking God and God's direction and that God speaks and leads, and lean into other people's experiences of God and what God has shown them and taught them. It's funny, even as I say that, one of the negative things I was going to mention before too, we have to be careful in the situations where one of the red flags or things that I would say not to do is don't make cutting or passive aggressive remarks in front of your friends or other people.
Or
that's
don't bring other people into it that don't need to be into it.
Yeah, to where you're basically slandering your spouse, or you're using negative rhetoric around them because you're actually, again, this is a byproduct of your resentment towards them. So you have to be careful about that. So when I say bring it in the context of community, safe community, godly community, wise community, bring it into other people, get counsels, to have conversations, talk about the ins and outs of the details, because I do think sometimes it's the same concept as marriage counseling as a whole, right? You need to get outside of your bubble, right? It's like there are times where you need an outside perspective. You need someone else to be able to speak to that. Someone that God has maybe gifted with more experience or discernment, or they've been married a long time and they've gone through similar situations. So I think inviting other people into that is an important part. Like, you don't have to do that in isolation. I do think it's all the things that we've said before. I think it's having continued conversation. I think it's continuing to pray. If your spouse is a believer, but they're not just there, again, encouraging them and asking them to pray. Let's intentionally seek God with the belief that God is going to give us the provision we need. He's going to give us the clarity. He's going to give us the wisdom. He's going to, open the door, close the door, whatever it is, to give us the red light, green light that we need to make that decision. And if they're not, it's, as we said earlier, I think it's that waiting game of trusting God. I mean, the Psalms, I was just reading today in the Psalms, how often they talk about waiting on the Lord. It is a part of our faith. Like, not everything happens instantaneously. It's not a math equation. It's not the moment you send up a prayer, tomorrow, God responds with an answer. There are times where, even as you were saying, I think in the process of waiting and loving our spouse and discerning, God is going to do something in our faith, right? In the sense of He's going to grow us. He's going to show us maybe new dimensions of who He is and how we can trust Him and how He shows up. Times that I think if that didn't happen, our growth would actually be lessened. And so, in other words, there's a strategic nature at times for God to put us in those moments where we are waiting, we are prayerfully seeking, and we don't have the direction, but just be open to what God might want to do in those moments. But yeah, I think the additional one, as I said earlier, bringing in some other counsel into that can be so invaluable to people to hear outside of just, them and their spouse and their perspective on this can really shed a lot of new light on maybe what they're, going through and what they're debating.
Yeah, I don't have really much to add other than just being purposed to set aside a specific season for fasting and for prayer. And fasting can look a couple different ways. It can be food. Paul encourages fasting of sex during a season for prayer. And so, but being purposed through a season to go, we're going to pray about this specific thing to see where God is leading us. And then along with inviting other people to be praying for us in that time. I remember, and I think I've shared this story multiple times, so forgive me for repeating a story over and over again, but Cass and I were not in a gridlock when she wanted to go to Haiti in 2010 after the earthquake. It wasn't like I was being rebellious, but wisdom said, do not send your wife to a politically like devastated area. You know what I mean? Because of that earthquake in Haiti in 2010. And yet Cass could not shake the sense that she was called to go there. And so like we prayed about it, we thought about it, but then we also invited wise counsel into it. I remember the conversation. I remember sitting in my office and you being like, everything inside of you is like, no, but can't shake that, like God might be doing something in this. And so like in that moment, that's what I needed to supersede the wisdom says, don't send your wife to a devastated country where it's dangerous. But the affirmation of someone else coming in and knowing that you sought God, knowing that you pray for our family, knowing that you love us, like it wasn't like just flippantly sent, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so like that moment was a faith solidifier for both her, who she had the desire and the calling, and me being willing to stay at home with the kids, being willing to be away from her for those 14 days that she was gone, being willing to risk her life to go. And so like, I just think that when you hit those moments where you're like, I just don't know what to do, seek God, seek God, seek God in every way you can, and bring as many people in as you can, like you said, to trust, to go along with you in that journey.
Well, as always, guys, thank you for your incredible wisdom. You know, I hopefully people were able to hear some truth that will help them navigate if they have some tension in their marriages, and going forward to set up some good rhythms to make their marriages better prepared so that when God speaks, they both can be on the same page. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.